Hello everyone. Welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we bring you 7 deeply disturbing true park ranger horror stories that will make you question what really lurks in America's most protected wilderness areas, and the rangers sworn to protect them. These are not fictional tales, but real encounters shared by park rangers who ventured into the most remote corners of national forests and state parks, only to face something they could never have anticipated or explained. Each story has been carefully researched and verified through witness testimonials, official incident reports, and supporting documentation from those who were there. Park rangers are trained to face the unexpected, yet what these 7 men and women encountered defied all logic, protocol, and rational explanation. The forests hold secrets that most people will never understand, and perhaps that is for the best. If you enjoy authentic horror content, grounded in real events that will keep you awake at night, subscribe to Dark Fears and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest investigations into the unknown. After you listen to these chilling accounts of unexplained disappearances, paranormal encounters, and unsettling mysteries that remain unresolved to this day, we want to hear from you in the comments below about your own encounters with the unexplained, whether in the woods or beyond now. Settle in as we explore the darkness that dwells in the deep forest, where civilization ends and something else entirely begins. My name is Alex Turner, and I've been a park ranger in the dense forests of Washington State for nearly 7 years. I've seen my share of wildlife accidents, lost hikers, and the occasional prankster. But nothing prepared me for what happened one October night in 2022. It started like any other late-night patrol. The full moon barely pierced through the canopy above, leaving the forest bathed in shadows. My truck's headlights cut narrow paths through the trees as I drove along the back roads, checking for stranded hikers and illegal campers. I parked near an old, abandoned ranger station to inspect the perimeter. The wind whispered through the pine needles, creating a low, almost human-like moan. I shook off the unease. After all, it was just the forest. As I walked around the building, flashlight in hand, I noticed a shape just beyond the tree line. A figure, tall and still, almost blending into the darkness. My gut tightened. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No reply. Only the sound of my own breathing. I convinced myself it was a deer or a tree, yet the sense of being watched didn't leave me. Something was out there. Something was waiting. I kept patrolling, trying to ignore the creeping feeling in my chest. Every few steps, I'd glance back toward the tree line, and the figure seemed closer. I stopped, frozen. The beam of my flashlight illuminated nothing but the forest floor. Then I heard it. A soft, deliberate snap of a branch. My heart raced. I spun in a full circle. The forest seemed to hold its breath. I called dispatch over my radio, but static answered. It was like the air itself had swallowed the signal. I decided to investigate, moving cautiously toward where I thought I saw movement. The crunch of leaves beneath my boots was deafening in the unnatural silence. And then I froze again. The figure was gone, completely vanished. No trace, no movement, only the oppressive stillness. I blinked, wondering if my eyes had been playing tricks, but something made my skin crawl. The feeling that it hadn't left. It had just waited. I returned to my truck, telling myself I was overreacting. But the unease lingered, gnawing at me like something alive brushing against my thoughts. That night, the forest didn't feel like a place I could understand. It felt aware. Hours passed. I drove along the winding forest roads, scanning with my flashlight and patrol lights. I kept thinking about that figure. Rationally, it couldn't have been human. It moved too silently, too deliberately, but every instinct screamed otherwise. Then I spotted it again, across a clearing, tall and still, just standing and watching. My pulse spiked. I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, I think I'm..." But the words caught in my throat. The figure was gone. No movement, no rustling, nothing. I stopped the truck and stepped out, flashlight ready. The silence pressed down like a weight. A cold breeze whispered through the trees, carrying the faintest scent of damp earth and decay. I thought I heard a whisper, a single word. Lost. I spun around, nothing. My mind tried to rationalize, but the feeling of being watched only intensified. I couldn't shake the sensation that whatever I had seen wasn't just out there. It was here, with me. By the time I returned to the ranger station, exhaustion had settled in. I shook it off and tried to log my night patrol, but my hands trembled. I could feel eyes on me, unseen everywhere. The next morning, I returned to the patrol area with daylight, offering a fragile sense of safety. I scoured the forest floor near the clearing where I'd last seen the figure. Broken branches, deep footprints, too large to be human, marred the soft earth. Something had been here, and it had left its mark. I radioed the other rangers, but most dismissed it. "Probably a bear or elk," they said, trying to reassure me. But I knew the difference. Wildlife didn't move with intent, didn't vanish like a shadow swallowed by the night. The day passed slowly, each sound amplified, the flutter of leaves, the distant calls of birds. Even the wind seemed deliberate. I felt exposed, as if the forest was studying me, weighing me like prey. That evening, I returned to the station. My flashlight caught movement near the tree line, a flicker of motion. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer, heart hammering. But once again, nothing. It was becoming impossible to tell reality from imagination. Yet the signs on the ground were undeniable. Someone, or something, was playing a dangerous game, waiting for me to slip up. By the third night, the forest had grown hostile. Every patrol felt like walking into a trap. Leaves rustled without wind, shadows moved with a life of their own, and faint whispers curled around me like smoke. I was checking the old hiking trail that led deeper into the forest when I heard it. Footsteps following mine, not the shuffle of a hiker or animal, but deliberate, soft, patient. I spun around, empty trees. Then came the whisper, so close I could feel the breath. "Why are you here?" I backed away, fumbling for my radio. The static hissed and grew louder until it became a shriek that pierced the night. The figure appeared at the edge of my flashlight's beam, just for a moment. But that glimpse was enough. Tall, thin, eyes like dark pits, and an unnatural stillness that froze me in place. Before I could react, it vanished again, leaving nothing but a chilling silence and the echo of its voice inside my skull. I ran back to the station, hands trembling, praying daylight would bring answers that never came. Sleep was impossible. I stayed at the station, doors locked, but the unease never left. At around 2 a.m., I heard tapping on the metal roof. I froze. One tap, then another. Irregular, deliberate. My flashlight revealed nothing outside. The woods were still. Yet the sound persisted, moving around the perimeter as if circling me. My pulse raced. I tried rationalizing. A branch, a raccoon. But deep down, I knew this was something else. I crept to the window, peering into the darkness. Then I saw it again. Just a silhouette against the trees. It wasn't running, hiding, or moving. It simply watched. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, and reached for my emergency flare gun. But the figure was gone before I could even lift it. The forest had claimed its dominion, and I was only a visitor intruding into its ancient territory. The following night, I decided to patrol the East Trail, hoping a different path might bring clarity. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of wet soil and pine. Each step echoed unnaturally. Halfway along the trail, my flashlight flickered. I cursed and shook it, but when it steadied, I froze. Ahead, standing perfectly still, was the figure. My blood ran cold. I tried to call out, but my voice failed. Slowly, I approached. The figure didn't move or react, just watched. And then, without warning, it disappeared, not walked away, vanished, like it had never been there. I felt a strange vibration in my stomach, a sense that the forest itself had changed. Something in the shadows had claimed part of my mind that night, leaving me with a lingering paranoia I couldn't shake. By week 2, I realized the figure wasn't just appearing at random. It followed patterns, always ahead, always behind, always just at the edge of vision. And one night, as I rested at the station, I felt it in the air, an oppressive, watching presence. I couldn't hear footsteps, but I knew it moved closer. My radio emitted a low hum, then a whisper, clearer this time. "Leave now." I stepped outside, flashlight sweeping the perimeter. Nothing. And yet, every instinct screamed. It was there, waiting, unseen. I slept fitfully, dreamless, haunted by the memory of hollow eyes in the shadows. On the last night of my patrol, I resolved to confront it. I followed the trail deeper into the forest, flashlight trembling. Leaves crunched underfoot, yet I felt no resistance from the unseen watcher. Then, in a small clearing, I saw it fully. Tall, impossibly thin, dark eyes absorbing every flicker of light. It didn't move, didn't breathe, but radiated intent. My voice shook. "Who? What are you?" It tilted its head slowly, then whispered in a voice that chilled me to the bone. "Protector." Before I could respond, it vanished again. The clearing felt empty, yet alive, as if the forest itself had exhaled. I stumbled back, heart racing, realizing I had glimpsed something older than humanity, a guardian of the shadows. I returned to the station for the final time, shaken but alive. The figure never approached directly again, but I always felt its presence lingering in the woods months later. Other rangers reported seeing the same tall, silent figure. A shadow that watched but never interacted, appearing only at night. And though I left that forest, its gaze never left me. To this day, when I patrol other parks, I sometimes hear whispers in the wind. Sometimes I see movement where there shouldn't be, and I remember one terrifying truth. Some parts of the forest are alive in ways we can't understand, and some watchers are eternal. My name is Rachel Dawson, and I became a park ranger in the remote forests of Vermont 2 years ago. I had just been assigned to Hollow Creek, a stretch of dense woodland known for its isolation and eerie history. The locals whispered about strange disappearances, but I dismissed it as superstition. Until the night I moved into the old ranger cabin. The cabin sat on the bank of Hollow Creek itself, weathered and abandoned for nearly a decade. Its wooden walls creaked, the floorboards groaning as if remembering every past inhabitant. Moving in, I was struck by the silence. It wasn't peaceful, it was expectant, like the forest itself was holding its breath. As I unpacked, I noticed odd scratches on the doorframe. Fresh, not old. My first thought was raccoons or deer, but the marks were vertical, deliberate. A cold shiver ran down my spine, but I forced myself to ignore it. That evening, while making a small fire, I heard a faint tapping at the window. My heart skipped. The forest was still. No wind, no wildlife, just tapping. I stared into the darkness. Seeing nothing but the reflection of my own flashlight, I went to bed uneasy. Windows locked, but sleep didn't come. I kept thinking about the tapping. Something was outside, waiting. And Hollow Creek had secrets that would soon make my nights unbearable. The first week at Hollow Creek was tense. Every sound made me jump. The creek's water splashing, wind through the trees, the occasional owl call. But the strange noises were different. Footsteps circling the cabin at night, scratching along the roof, whispers just beyond hearing. One night, around 2 a.m., I awoke to the sound of someone, or something, walking on the porch. I froze, listening as it paced back and forth, slow and deliberate. My flashlight illuminated only the porch railing, but I could feel it there, watching, waiting. I called dispatch, but got only static. I tried rationalizing, raccoons, branches, anything natural. But my gut told me it was something else, something intelligent, observing me. That night, I kept the cabin locked and flashlight ready. Every creak and groan felt like it had intent. By morning, I found scratch marks on the door that hadn't been there before. Long, vertical, deep, not animal claws. Something had been outside, waiting. I started journaling the occurrences, hoping documenting them would help me make sense of it. But writing only made it worse. The forest seemed to lean closer, as if reading over my shoulder. It was during my third night when I first saw it. I stepped outside to check the creek. Flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness, across the water, between the twisted trees. I glimpsed a figure. Tall, thin, unnaturally still, eyes reflecting a dim glint from the moonlight. I froze. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, or so it seemed. My first instinct was to run, but curiosity rooted me in place. Then it vanished, not walked away, gone entirely, leaving only the darkness behind. I returned to the cabin shaken. Sleep was impossible. Every creak and groan of the cabin seemed amplified, as if the forest was mocking me, testing my courage. I couldn't tell if the creature was a person, an animal, or something far older, something that belonged to Hollow Creek itself. The following day, the locals warned me. Some cabins aren't empty, even when they look like it. I laughed it off, though uneasily. I didn't realize that the warnings were far too late, and Hollow Creek had claimed my attention, my fear, and soon, much more. By the second week, the cabin itself felt alive. Doors I had locked in the evening were slightly open in the morning. Objects moved. Flashlight shifted from the desk to the floor. The floorboards creaked in patterns that mimicked footsteps, pacing. I told myself I was imagining things, stressed from isolation. But the scratches outside worsened. Something had been climbing the walls, perhaps peering in through the windows, always just out of reach. One evening, I went to the creek for water and saw faint footprints in the mud. They were huge, human-like, but elongated, impossibly so. The tracks led into the forest and vanished. I followed, flashlight shaking, only to find nothing but darkness. The isolation was affecting my mind. Every night, I felt watched. Every shadow seemed to lean closer. Hollow Creek wasn't just remote. It was alive, and it wanted acknowledgement. The whispers started shortly after. First, unintelligible, just soft hisses and sighs. Then words. Leave. Now. They were close, coming from the walls, the floor, the forest beyond. One night, I decided to stay awake, flashlight in hand. The porch creaked. I froze. The figure appeared, just outside, between the trees. Its posture was wrong, elongated, unnatural, its eyes empty, hollow, reflecting no light. I whispered, "Who are you?" No answer. Just the tapping of a branch against the cabin roof. And then a voice, low and deliberate. "You don't belong." I retreated inside, locked the doors, and stayed awake all night. Sleep had become impossible. The forest was no longer neutral, it had intentions. By the fourth night, exhaustion had blurred the line between fear and reality. The cabin no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a cage. The scratching and tapping had increased, almost constant now. Echoing through the thin wooden walls, I decided to leave the cabin for the first time after dark, thinking movement might break the spell. Stepping into the fog, I realized how heavy the air was. Each step into the forest felt deliberate, as though the ground itself resisted my presence. Then I saw it again. The figure was closer, standing between two twisted pines only 30 feet away. Its body was elongated, unnaturally thin, and its head tilted at a wrong angle. My pulse raced, legs frozen. I slowly raised my flashlight. The figure didn't flinch. It just stared, hollow eyes boring into me. A whisper carried through the mist. "You shouldn't have come." I stumbled backward, almost falling into the creek. When I turned back, it had vanished. But the fog seemed heavier now, almost alive, curling and shifting as though breathing. I ran back to the cabin, locking every door, bolting every window. That night, I barely slept. Every creak, every sigh of the wind sounded like it was inside my head, repeating the same words. "You belong to Hollow Creek." By the fifth night, I began noticing subtle changes inside the cabin. Objects rearranged themselves. My journal was open to blank pages I hadn't touched. Cold drafts swept through rooms, even when windows were locked. I heard whispers everywhere, under the floor, above the ceiling, behind every door. "Leave, now. Leave, now." I couldn't escape them. Even the creek seemed to gurgle, carrying the same haunting cadence. Driven by desperation, I approached the porch, flashlight ready. The figure emerged from the fog, closer than ever. It tilted its head as if studying me, considering my fear. I took a shaky breath and shouted, "Why are you here?" No response, just silence. Then, slowly, it raised one impossibly long arm, pointing into the forest. My heart sank as a new terror gripped me. The entire forest seemed alive, responding to it, moving subtly, waiting for me to step into it. I retreated inside, the walls now feeling thin, as though the cabin itself was listening. I realized I wasn't alone. And the forest hadn't forgotten the cabin's previous occupants. Hollow Creek remembered them. And it remembered me. The following night, I decided I had to leave Hollow Creek. I packed essentials and opened the door. The forest greeted me like a living entity, fog thick and heavy, branches reaching toward me like claws, and the figure appeared again, stepping silently into my path. Its movements were deliberate and impossibly smooth. My flashlight flickered as I froze, realizing I could not pass without acknowledgement. A voice, low and guttural, whispered from nowhere and everywhere, "You belong with us." Fear rooted me in place. The forest seemed to pulse around me, branches swaying though there was no wind. The creek bubbled like a living thing, water swirling unnaturally. I could feel every instinct screaming, "Run!" But where could I go? Hollow Creek had no exit, not tonight. The figure tilted its head and stepped aside, almost inviting me forward. My fear wrestled with instinct. I took a step, then another. Every step felt like sinking into invisible quicksand, I realized then. The cabin and forest weren't haunted. They were sentient. And they were curious about me, the new ranger who dared to intrude. I forced myself deeper into the forest, following an invisible pull, guided only by the moonlight and fear. The figure disappeared into the mist, yet I could feel its gaze constantly upon me. Suddenly, I stumbled into a small clearing, and the air changed. The forest was silent, too silent. The creek had stopped flowing, replaced by an unnatural stillness. The figure appeared again, closer than before, face barely visible but features distorted, eyes hollow. A whisper slithered around me. Stay forever. Panic surged. I ran blindly, branches clawing at my clothes, fog wrapping around me. The clearing seemed to stretch endlessly, no exit in sight. Hollow Creek was no longer a forest. It was a trap, and I was prey. Exhausted, I tripped and fell into the mud, gasping. When I looked up, the figure hovered over me, not moving, but radiating an impossible presence. Then it vanished. Silence returned, but I knew it hadn't truly left. I eventually escaped Hollow Creek at dawn, running until the forest thinned. Exhausted, I collapsed on the roadside, convinced I had left it behind. But even now, years later, I feel its presence when I patrol isolated forests. The cabin remains on Hollow Creek, abandoned. Yet it is never empty. Rangers report whispers, scratching, shadows moving just beyond sight. Something alive in the trees, waiting, remembering every visitor. I realized that night that some forests aren't haunted. They're aware Hollow Creek doesn't need to attack. It just observes, studies, and waits. And if you linger too long, you belong to it too. To this day, I cannot walk alone in the forest without feeling watched, without hearing the faintest whisper carried on the wind. Hollow Creek remembers. My name is David Mercer, and I've been a park ranger for almost a decade, patrolling some of the most isolated forests in the Rocky Mountains. But nothing prepared me for the assignment I received in late 2021. The old, abandoned watchtower on Raven's Peak. The locals called it forgotten, and the trail leading to it hadn't been maintained for decades. They warned me about strange noises, unexplained lights, and occasional disappearances in the surrounding woods. Naturally, I was skeptical. Until I arrived. The watchtower was perched on a ridge overlooking a sheer cliff, surrounded by thick pine and spruce. Its wooden beams were rotted, steps creaking ominously in the wind, and the air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and decaying leaves. As I approached, I noticed scratches etched into the tower's base, deep, fresh, and vertical. Like claws marking territory, I shook off the chill creeping up my spine, convincing myself it was just animals or vandals. But the forest seemed to watch me, silent and expectant. That first night inside the tower, I felt the isolation acutely. Wind howled through the broken windows, carrying whispers that sounded almost like distant voices. Somewhere deep in the woods, a branch snapped. I froze, realizing my patrol wasn't alone. I settled in, trying to set up a temporary patrol station in the tower. The wooden floor groaned beneath my weight with every step. Outside, the forest was unnaturally quiet, too quiet. Around midnight, I heard it. Soft footsteps on the tower's stairwell. I froze, flashlight in hand. No one had entered after me. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. Then came a whisper. "Why are you here?" I shined the flashlight around, revealing nothing but rotting beams and shadows that seemed to twitch unnaturally. My heart pounded. I checked my radio. Dead. Static. Not a signal for miles. The footsteps returned. Slow. Deliberate. I backed against the wall, realizing the tower itself seemed alive, vibrating subtly under my feet. As if reacting to the presence, sleep became impossible. Every creak, groan, and whisper pierced my mind. I stayed awake, documenting the sounds, hoping rationality could anchor me. But that night, I understood something fundamental. The watchtower was forgotten for a reason, and some things in the forest were better left undisturbed. By the second night, the forest began showing its strange patterns. Small lights flickered through the trees, dim, almost candle-like, but moving erratically. Defying natural explanation, I stepped outside to investigate, flashlight trembling. The lights disappeared whenever I approached, only to reappear further away. They didn't seem random. They seemed guiding me, or perhaps hurting me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Then I heard it, a low, guttural hum from the ridge above. My flashlight flickered. From the corner of my eye, I glimpsed movement. A shadow, tall and thin, with elongated limbs, vanishing behind a tree. I ran back inside, heart racing. The tower felt smaller, claustrophobic, like it was closing in. The forest outside had become a maze of shifting shadows, and unseen eyes. I realized, in that moment, that the watchtower wasn't a sanctuary. It was a trap, bait for those who dared enter. Over the next few nights, the encounters escalated. I'd hear footsteps circling the tower, scratching along the wooden beams. Sometimes, I'd see glimpses of the figure through broken windows, tall, impossibly thin, motionless, with eyes that reflected no light. One night, I decided to confront it. I stepped outside into the fog. Trying to follow the trail into the forest, the figure appeared ahead, motionless, head tilted unnaturally. I froze, realizing I had no way to escape if it chose to approach. A whisper floated through the air. Leave now, or stay forever. I stumbled back to the tower, slamming the door. I felt the walls vibrate like a heartbeat beneath my hands. That night, sleep became impossible. Every shadow in the room moved on its own, I understood then. The forest and the watchtower were alive, and they knew I was afraid. I couldn't sleep. The creaking stairwell called to me, echoing with footsteps that weren't mine. Every night, I'd climb the tower, flashlight shaking, convinced I'd see someone or something. At the top one night, I did. At the top landing, a shadow hunched over the railing, facing away. Its form was inhuman, limbs elongated and bent at wrong angles. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze on me, burning into my mind. I shouted, but my voice caught. When I blinked, it had vanished. But the smell lingered, earthy, metallic, like blood mixed with decay. My hands shook as I descended the stairs, realizing the tower itself was a vessel, amplifying fear, feeding on dread. By the sixth night, I could no longer distinguish between the forest and the tower. Every sound, the creak of a beam, the whistle of wind through broken windows, felt purposeful, as if the forest was alive, watching me. Around midnight, I was standing on the top platform, peering into the darkness below. A cold wind swept through, carrying whispers that seemed to originate everywhere and nowhere at once. You shouldn't be here. This is ours. I froze. Then I felt it. A presence, heavier than air, pressing against me. My flashlight flickered, shadows dancing wildly. When it steadied, the figure appeared across the forest floor below. Impossibly tall, thin, almost blending into the trees, eyes glowing faintly with an unearthly light. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure raised an elongated hand, and I heard a low, guttural sound. Not a voice, not an animal, but something that resonated in my chest. I stumbled backward, nearly falling from the tower. That night, I realized that the watchtower didn't just observe. It communicated in ways I couldn't comprehend, and the forest had eyes, ears, and a will of its own. And I was being studied. Sleep had become impossible. Every night, I heard footsteps circling the tower, pacing slowly, deliberately. I could feel the vibrations through the rotting wooden floorboards. One evening, I ventured cautiously outside, flashlight cutting through the dense fog. The forest was silent, oppressively silent. Then, from the ridge behind the tower, I heard it. The slow crunch of enormous footsteps, far too large to be human. I turned, flashlight shaking. Shadows moved between the trees. Tall, unnatural silhouettes that didn't behave like living creatures. I realized I was trapped in a theater of dread, orchestrated by something older, more patient than any predator I had known. The figure emerged onto the ridge, its limbs bent at impossible angles, movements silent yet deliberate. My stomach churned. I wanted to flee, but something rooted me to the spot, curiosity and fear wrestling. It tilted its head, and I heard the faintest whisper carried by the wind. "You belong to us now." I ran back inside, slamming the door. Every beam, every step of the tower groaned, as if protesting my intrusion. I could no longer pretend this was a job or a duty. The tower and forest were sentient, aware, and patient. And the next night, I noticed something impossible. The tower itself seemed to breathe. Walls expanded and contracted subtly, groaning with rhythm like a heartbeat. The air thickened, charged with intent, almost electrical. I climbed to the top again, desperate to see the source of the strange energy. The figure appeared below, across the clearing, eyes hollow and glowing faintly. But this time, the forest around it moved. The trees bending subtly, the fog forming shapes that resembled figures watching me. I whispered, "What do you want?" The response came, carried by the wind. Neither whisper nor voice. "We watch. We wait. And soon you will understand." I realized the forest and the tower were not separate. They were one entity, a predator that could manipulate perception, gravity, even sound itself. Panic surged. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet leaving seemed impossible. The forest itself closed in, fog thickening as if it had boundaries only it knew. By the 9th night, I had accepted that leaving on my own was impossible. The tower demanded interaction, and the forest demanded my attention. I followed an unspoken pull into the clearing below, flashlight trembling, every nerve screaming. The figure was waiting, larger than before, limbs stretching impossibly, its eyes bored into me, hollow, endless, carrying centuries of observation. The forest itself seemed to lean closer, fog swirling around me in a suffocating embrace. I tried to speak, but only a whisper emerged. I'm leaving." The figure tilted its head slowly. Then the clearing erupted with the subtle movements of hundreds of unseen presences, branches shifting like skeletal hands, shadows merging and twisting. It stepped closer, but not violently, deliberately, studying me, testing my fear. A whisper floated through the fog. "You cannot leave yet. You belong to the watchtower now." I stumbled backward, tripping over roots, falling to the mud-soaked forest floor. And then it vanished. Silence returned, but it was a silence that pressed against my skull, oppressive and knowing. I survived that night, barely. The locals say the watchtower is abandoned now, but that's misleading. It's never empty. Rangers report whispers, shadows moving along the stairs, and glimpses of tall, thin figures in the fog. I've tried to move on. But Hollow Creek, or rather, Raven's Peak, stays with me. In the wind through any forest, I hear whispers. In the shadows, I see glimpses of elongated figures. The tower taught me a lesson I will never forget. Some places are alive, patient, and aware, and some watchers never leave. If you ever find an abandoned watchtower deep in the forest, remember this. Look, but do not stay. Move fast, keep quiet, and never, ever think you are alone. Because the forest, the tower, and their watchers are always watching. My name is Lucas Reynolds, and I've been a park ranger in the Pacific Northwest for over 8 years. But nothing could have prepared me for Blackwood Forest, a dense, seemingly endless stretch of wilderness where sunlight barely touched the moss-covered floor. I had been assigned to patrol a remote section of the forest after a series of strange disappearances among hikers. The locals refused to go near the area after dusk, warning that voices echoed through the trees, luring travelers deeper into the woods. Naturally, I was skeptical, but I was also curious. On my first night, as I hiked to my designated watch point, the forest seemed alive. Every snapping twig, rustling leaf, and whisper of wind felt deliberate, like the trees were observing my every step. The canopy above blocked out the moonlight, casting the forest in near-complete darkness. By the time I reached an old ranger cabin tucked within the forest, I was exhausted but unable to relax. The cabin had been abandoned for decades, its wooden walls scarred by time, and yet I felt the air inside thrum with a strange energy. Shadows moved against the walls as if breathing, and the silence was almost oppressive. That night, I lay awake listening, and then I heard it. A faint whisper carried through the forest, repeating my name. Lucas. Lucas. I thought the whispering had been a trick of the wind, but it returned the next night. Louder, closer. This time, I could swear it came from just outside the cabin. I grabbed my flashlight, heart racing, and stepped into the dense undergrowth. The forest was eerily still, except for the faintest rustle behind me. I spun around, flashlight cutting through darkness. Nothing. Only the gnarled trees, mist curling around their roots, and the cold, damp air pressing against my skin. Then I heard it again. Lucas. This time, it was accompanied by a faint footstep. I froze, listening as a shadow flitted between the trees. My instincts screamed to run. But curiosity rooted me in place. I realized that the whispers weren't random. They mimicked voices, sounds, even movements, that the forest was aware of me, learning me, testing me. By dawn, I had marked the first warning signs in my notebook. Footprints that didn't match any animal, scratches on the cabin door, and the eerie sensation of being followed even when no one was there. I had entered Blackwood Forest as a ranger. But the forest already knew I was trespassing. A week into my patrol, I encountered a hiker named Carl, who had become lost in Blackwood. He was pale, eyes wide with fear. He whispered that voices had called him deeper into the woods, promising safety, warmth, or even guidance. But he realized too late that following them was a trap. I decided to help him back to the ranger cabin. But as we walked, I noticed something strange. Every time Carl stepped into a clearing, his reflection seemed distorted in the puddles or creek water, elongated limbs, twisted angles. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Then, without warning, Carl froze. The whispering returned, louder, surrounding us. Shadows coiled around the undergrowth, moving unnaturally. I turned to call his name, and he was gone. One moment he had been walking beside me, the next swallowed by the forest, leaving only a faint echo of his scream behind. I tried to follow, but the forest seemed to rearrange itself. Paths I had just walked twisted, trees seemed to shift, and the fog thickened, obscuring every landmark Blackwood Forest had claimed him before I could react. I returned to the cabin shaken, noticing new scratches along the walls, deep and vertical, like claws or talons. The whispering continued, sometimes in human-like voices, sometimes indecipherable. That night, I kept watch outside. From the darkness, I saw shapes moving among the trees. Tall, impossibly thin figures, almost blending with the fog and branches. Their movements were silent but deliberate, observing, waiting. I began documenting everything. The sounds, the shapes, the footprints that appeared and vanished, the whispers that called my name. Every detail seemed like a warning. The forest had patterns, rituals, and I was a participant whether I wanted to be or not. By the fourth night, I realized the forest didn't just observe, it guided, manipulated, and tested. Blackwood was alive, aware, and it wanted something from me. Fear, attention, acknowledgement. The whispers escalated. Around midnight, I heard snapping branches, footsteps faster than any human could run. Approaching the cabin, I grabbed my flashlight. Heart-hammering shadows danced on the walls, elongating unnaturally. Suddenly, something slammed into the door with impossible force. Rattling the entire structure, I fell backward, flashlight flickering. A cold, inhuman laugh, or something like a laugh, echoed through the fog outside. I backed into a corner, realizing the forest had breached the cabin's safety. The air itself felt alive, pressing in, moving with intent. The creature, or creatures outside, weren't just shadows. They were aware of me, interacting with me, testing boundaries by dawn. The scratches outside had deepened, forming patterns almost like symbols. Blackwood wasn't random. It communicated. It was patient, ancient, and hungry for acknowledgement. By the sixth night, I could no longer ignore the whispers. They weren't random. They called me, guiding me deeper into Blackwood Forest. I tried to resist, but the echoes seemed to burrow into my mind, tugging me toward the heart of the darkness. Clutching my flashlight, I followed a narrow, overgrown path I hadn't seen before. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, masking the ground. Each step seemed deliberate, as if the forest itself was testing my balance, my resolve. Then I saw the first figure. Tall, thin, humanoid, moving silently between the trees. Its face was hidden, but the sense of awareness was overwhelming. The forest seemed to react to its presence. The fog rose, branches bent, shadows stretched unnaturally. I froze as the figure stopped and turned toward me. A whisper echoed from nowhere and everywhere. "You're next." The words weren't spoken. They were planted directly into my mind, vibrating in my skull. I ran, tripping over roots, heart pounding. The path behind me seemed to disappear, swallowed by fog. Blackwood Forest had claimed the trail, and I realized I wasn't just being watched. I was being hunted. By the seventh night, I had lost all sense of direction. Every path seemed to twist back on itself. I stumbled into a clearing, circular and unnaturally symmetrical. The trees around it bent inward, forming an eerie ring. Inside the circle, shadows moved without origin. The tall figures were no longer distant. They stood around me in perfect formation, elongated limbs bending at impossible angles. My flashlight trembled in my grip as the whispers crescendoed. "Stay. Forever. Join us." The forest itself pulsed, alive, pressing in. The ground beneath my feet seemed soft, almost breathing. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and decay. My skin crawled as I realized the forest wanted me to surrender, to become one with the shadows. I tried to retreat, but my legs refused to move. Fear anchored me in place. The figures tilted their heads in unison, watching, waiting, assessing my resolve. The whispers were everywhere, repeating my name, calling me into the circle. By the eighth night, I had come to understand one terrible truth. Blackwood Forest wasn't haunted. It was sentient. It observed, manipulated, and fed on fear. The whispering voices weren't ghosts. They were extensions of the forest itself, ancient, patient, and aware. I ventured deeper. Drawn by an invisible pull, I came upon the heart of the forest. A massive, gnarled tree unlike any I'd seen, its bark blackened and twisted, roots snaking across the clearing like tentacles. The figures circled it silently. The whispers intensified, now forming words. You belong here, as we belong here. Join us. I realized they didn't want to harm me. They wanted to assimilate me, to make me part of the forest's consciousness. My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to flee. But the fog shifted, blocking the path back. The figures approached in unison, silent yet purposeful. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Then I heard it, the heartbeat of the forest itself, slow and deep, resonating through the ground, echoing in my chest. By the 9th night, I had no illusions. The forest was patient, eternal, and I was a mere trespasser. The figures reached for me, not violently, but with deliberate intent. I felt a pull, as if invisible threads were yanking me toward the gnarled heart tree. I resisted, screaming, thrashing, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. The whispers filled my mind, chanting in unison, "Join, become one, forever." And then I felt it. My body loosening, merging with the forest around me, my vision blurred. The shadows and fog seemed to wrap around my skin, pulling me into the ground. I realized the forest was not just alive. It was an organism, and I was being absorbed into it, becoming part of its consciousness. As my senses merged with the shadows, I understood the forest's patience, its hunger, its eternity. I was now part of Blackwood, a watcher among the trees, another echo calling to the next intruder. Years later, I am no longer human in the way I once was. I am part of Blackwood Forest, a whisper among the trees, a shadow in the fog. I watch, I call, I wait for the next hiker, ranger, or curious soul to enter. The locals still tell stories of the missing, of voices in the forest, of shadows moving unnaturally at night. And they are right. The forest is alive, patient, and aware. If you ever hear your name whispered among the trees in a dense, foggy forest, remember this. You are being observed, studied, tested, and if you linger too long, the forest will claim you too, adding your echo to its eternal chorus. My name is Hazel Thompson, and in 2021, my husband Marcus and I moved from California to Washington State, seeking isolation and a slower pace of life. We purchased a small cabin on 10 acres of forest east of Olympia, surrounded by thick, evergreen trees. The locals were friendly but offered warnings about the area: stray dogs, unexplained noises, and the occasional missing hiker. But we brushed it off. Our first weeks were peaceful. Birds chirped, the wind rustled through pines, and life felt slower, simpler. That is, until we noticed him, a man who walked a dog along the edge of our property every evening. At first, he seemed harmless. A middle-aged man, dog leash in hand, nodding politely. But there was something off. He never smiled and never spoke, and his eyes were cold. Calculating one evening, as Marcus was chopping firewood, the man stopped at the edge of the forest, staring directly at us. The dog, a large black shepherd, didn't bark. It just stared, eyes fixed on me. The silence was unnatural, almost purposeful. That night, I lay awake listening. I could hear soft footsteps on the gravel outside the cabin, moving slowly, circling. And then came the whisper, "You shouldn't be here." By the second week, the visits became routine. Every evening, the man appeared at the forest edge, dog in tow, never speaking. The dog would sometimes sit silently, staring into our windows as if seeing something no human could. One night, I stepped outside to get the mail and froze. The man was closer than usual, standing just beyond the tree line. His presence was suffocating, his eyes unblinking. The dog growled lowly, a sound more like a warning than aggression. I called Marcus, and he emerged with a flashlight. As soon as the beam hit the man, he vanished into the trees, dog following silently. We searched briefly, but the forest seemed endless, swallowing him without a trace. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin floor sounded like footsteps. Every rustle outside felt like the man, or the dog, moving just beyond sight. I began hearing faint scratching on the windows, almost imperceptible. Like claws or fingernails dragging slowly across glass, I realized the dog wasn't ordinary. And the man? He was no casual walker. Something about them felt predatory, patient, and intelligent, as if they were testing us, learning our routines, observing our weaknesses. I began researching local news. Over the past 2 years, several hikers and joggers had gone missing in the surrounding forest. Witnesses described seeing a man walking a large black dog before the disappearances. Some said the man never spoke, just stood silently, watching, almost hypnotic. The thought made my stomach turn. The realization hit me. We were living on the edge of a hunting ground. Every step outside, every evening walk, could bring him and his dog closer. One evening, I noticed paw prints in the mud near the cabin. Enormous, too large for any normal dog. They led from the forest, across the edge of our property, and then disappeared. There was no sign of the man. Yet I knew he had been there. Watching, I tried to leave, but Marcus insisted the cabin was ours. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? A man and his supernatural dog are stalking us. The logical part of me dismissed it, but deep down, my instincts screamed danger. That night, the dog appeared at the edge of the cabin yard, its glowing eyes fixed on me. The man's shadow was behind it, partially obscured by trees, unmoving yet omnipresent. A week later, Marcus and I were sleeping when we heard the cabin door rattle. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then came the low growl of the dog. Just outside our bedroom window, I peeked through the blinds. The dog sat motionless, eyes locked on me. Behind it, the man stood perfectly still, shadowed and faceless in the darkness. The growl grew louder, resonating in my chest, primal and terrifying. Marcus stirred. We both watched as the dog shifted, moving closer to the cabin, paw steps silent against the gravel. The man remained in the shadows, his presence freezing us in place. Suddenly, the dog lunged at the window with unnatural strength. The glass rattled, cracks forming along the frame. I screamed. Marcus grabbed a fireplace poker and ran outside, but by the time he reached the edge of the forest, both man and dog had vanished. We spent the rest of the night barricading doors and windows, the echo of claws scraping wood haunting every corner. By dawn, it was as if nothing had happened. But we knew better. Something was out there. Patient, intelligent, and relentless. We decided to set up security cameras around the cabin perimeter. The footage shocked us. Every night, the dog appeared exactly the same time. Sometimes standing motionless for hours, the man never appeared on camera. Yet shadows shifted unnaturally, suggesting movement beyond normal visibility. One clip showed the dog pawing at the door, while a faint figure, almost invisible, hovered behind the trees. In another, the shadows of both the man and dog stretched impossibly across the forest floor, bending around trees like liquid. It became clear. The dog wasn't ordinary. Its strength, speed, and silence defied nature. The man, if he was human at all, was equally unnatural. Together, They were a predator hunting team, calculating, patient, and aware of every movement we made. Sleep became impossible. Every sound, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, distant howls, felt directed at us. Blackness wasn't comforting. It was alive, watching, feeding on our fear. By the sixth night, fear had become a constant companion. Marcus and I no longer left the cabin after dark, but the man and his dog seemed undeterred. Every evening, their presence grew closer, almost audibly circling the cabin. The dog's growls were low and deliberate, vibrating through the wooden floor. That night, I decided to confront it. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The beam cut through the dense darkness. At first, I saw nothing, just the fog curling around the pines. Then, the dog emerged from the mist, its eyes glowing red, unblinking. Behind it, the man appeared, his form distorted as though the forest itself had shaped him. The dog barked, but it wasn't a normal bark. It was a deep, resonant sound that shook the air. The man lifted a hand, pointing toward the forest. Suddenly, shadows twisted unnaturally, forming humanoid shapes that seemed to move independently of the trees. I froze, realizing the entire forest was complicit. The whispers returned, echoing inside my skull. "You cannot escape. You belong here." I stumbled back inside, slamming the door. Marcus held me tight as the scratches on the walls grew deeper overnight. It wasn't just the dog, they were all around us, patient, waiting, and omnipresent. By the seventh night, desperation had set in. We tried leaving the cabin, but the forest seemed to close in. Paths twisted, fog thickened, and the familiar clearing that led to the road vanished. Every tree seemed to lean toward us, casting long, sinister shadows. From the edge of the cabin, the dog appeared again, silently observing. The man stood motionless behind it, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Every instinct screamed that they could see our every thought. Every movement, Marcus suggested we set traps, piles of stones, tripwires. But the forest ignored them. It was as if our every action had already been anticipated. The whispers grew louder, repeating our names in distorted tones. I realized we were no longer visitors. We were prey. And Blackwood, or whatever this forest had become, was orchestrating everything. The eighth night brought terror unlike anything before. I glimpsed the dog in full form as it stepped into the moonlight. It wasn't just large, it was massive. Limbs longer than normal, muscles taut and unnatural. Its eyes burned with intelligence, predatory awareness. The man wasn't human either. His movements were too precise, limbs too long, joints bending in ways that made my stomach turn. They weren't ordinary beings. They were hunters, perfect predators of the forest, existing beyond natural law. They approached slowly, deliberately. While the fog thickened into walls, my heart pounded, yet I couldn't move. It was a trance-like paralysis, fear rooted in my very bones. The whispers, now deafening, filled my mind with visions of countless others lost to the forest, their screams woven into the trees themselves. I realized the dog and man were conduits of the forest, extensions of a consciousness I could not comprehend. Escape seemed impossible. By the ninth night, Marcus and I decided to run. We slipped out the back door, trying to reach the road, but the forest seemed alive. Trees shifted, roots reached for us, fog thickened into solid walls. The dog appeared first, bounding silently, eyes glowing. Behind it, the man moved impossibly fast, limbs stretching as he navigated the trees. Every step we took was anticipated, every escape route blocked. Branches clawed at our skin. The whispers became screams in my head. "You belong here. Forever." We sprinted blindly, fog choking, lungs burning. And then, just as we reached what seemed like an opening, the dog and the man vanished, replaced by shadows curling out of the mist, blocking our path. I realized the forest didn't just contain them, it was them. We fell to our knees, trapped, the forest pressing in from all sides. Our fear had made us visible, marked us, made us prey. We survived that night somehow, though I'm not sure how. By dawn, the dog and the man were gone, leaving only silence. The forest seemed to exhale, patient, as if our struggle had been amusing, expected, and inconsequential. We left the cabin the next morning, abandoning everything. But even now, miles away, I feel their eyes in the dark, the dog's gaze following me, whispering in echoes through the wind. I've learned that some predators are not animals, not even human. They are patience, intelligence, and darkness made real. And some forests do not forgive, do not forget, and never let go. If you ever see a man walking a black dog in the woods, heed this warning. Stay away. Watch, yes, but never, ever follow. My name is Emily Carter, and last fall, I decided to take a solo retreat in the Appalachian Mountains to clear my mind. I found a listing for a small cabin deep in a secluded hollow, away from towns and neighbors. The reviews were sparse but oddly positive, claiming peace, solitude, and breathtaking scenery. I ignored the few vague warnings about strange noises or uneasy feelings. The drive was long, winding through narrow mountain roads shrouded in mist. By the time I reached the hollow, the sun was dipping behind the peaks. The cabin appeared suddenly, half hidden among towering pines, its weathered exterior blending seamlessly with the forest. It was charming in an isolated, almost lonely way. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and moss. Dust lay thick on shelves, and cobwebs adorned the corners, but it felt welcoming. That night, as I unpacked, I noticed scratches along the walls, faint but deliberate. The sound of the wind through the hollow carried strange echoes, almost like whispers. Brushing against my ears, I shrugged it off as imagination. That is, until I heard the first knock. Light, deliberate, on the front door. No one was outside. By the second night, the hollow seemed alive. The wind carried distant, unintelligible whispers, echoing through the trees in patterns that made no logical sense. Sometimes, I could swear it called my name. Curiosity overcame fear. I grabbed a flashlight and explored the clearing around the cabin. Every tree seemed gnarled, with roots twisting across the ground like serpents. Shadows pooled unnaturally beneath the trunks, moving subtly as if observing me. I noticed footprints leading into the forest, appearing fresh each morning. Yet no one ever left the hollow. They were humanoid, but elongated and distorted, like the land itself had pressed impressions of some creature into the soil. Later, while cooking dinner, I found another strange sign. A small pile of stones on the kitchen table. I hadn't touched them. I didn't leave the cabin. Yet they were arranged deliberately, pointing toward the window that faced the forest. I began to understand that the hollow wasn't just empty land. It was sentient, aware, and patient. The forest and the cabin were connected, watching, testing, and, perhaps, hunting. The first night, I awoke to the sound of the front door creaking open. Heart racing, I grabbed the flashlight. Outside, the clearing was empty, bathed in silvery moonlight. But the forest beyond was moving. A figure emerged, tall, impossibly thin, stepping soundlessly between the trees. Its movements were unnerving, deliberate, predatory. I could see its elongated fingers, the faint glint of eyes reflecting the moonlight. My instinct screamed to hide. but my curiosity anchored me. Then I noticed the ground littered with small objects. Feathers, bones, and stones, arranged in patterns that looked ritualistic. It was as if the figure, or the forest, was leaving me a message, a warning, or an invitation. Frozen in place, I watched as the figure paused at the edge of the clearing, raising its head, tilting it as if assessing me. The whispers returned, low and unintelligible, brushing against my mind like smoke. I had a sickening realization. The hollow wasn't just alive, it was aware of me specifically. Over the next few days, the hollow made its presence undeniable. Every morning, I found new patterns on the ground outside the cabin. Small sticks, stones, and even leaves, arranged into symbols I couldn't decipher. The forest seemed to breathe, the fog thickening and thinning, as if in sync with some invisible rhythm. I tried leaving, but the paths twisted impossibly. Every road I remembered vanished or curved back toward the cabin. Even my GPS malfunctioned, showing distorted, impossible readings. One evening, while peering out the window, I saw dozens of shadowy figures watching from the tree line. They didn't move like humans, and yet their attention was deliberate. When I stepped outside to confront them, they vanished into the mist, leaving only silence and a chill that ran deep into my bones. By the fourth night, I realized something horrifying. The hollow wasn't just alive, it had intent. It wasn't merely observing, it was shaping my experience, testing my reactions, learning my weaknesses. I wasn't alone. I never had been. While exploring the surrounding woods, I discovered a narrow, hidden path behind the cabin. Overgrown and nearly invisible, it descended steeply into a hollowed-out depression in the forest floor. At the bottom, I found remnants of a burned-out campfire and more symbols etched into stones and tree trunks. I realized the hollow had been active long before my arrival. It seemed to catalog events, marking rituals or sacrifices in cryptic ways. Every symbol, every object, was part of a system I couldn't comprehend, but I could feel its purpose: control, observation, domination. That night, the whispers became intelligible, forming words in my mind. You were expected. You will remain. The fear was paralyzing. The hollow had chosen me, or perhaps always intended to. I barricaded myself inside the cabin, listening as the wind carried soft, deliberate footsteps through the hollow. They circled the cabin, slow and meticulous, patient and deliberate. I understood the forest wasn't just waiting, it was hunting. By the sixth night, fear had become a constant, gnawing presence. I could no longer distinguish between natural sounds and the deliberate movements of the hollow. The trees themselves seemed to bend, roots twisting toward the cabin, branches stretching as if reaching for me. The fog thickened into walls, isolating the cabin from the rest of the world. Suddenly, I heard soft, deliberate footsteps approaching. I grabbed a flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the dense fog. Shadows moved unnaturally between the trees, figures I could not fully see, but whose presence radiated menace. The air pulsed with whispers. You cannot leave. You belong here. Then, the ground beneath me shivered. I stumbled, realizing the forest itself was moving subtly, shifting around the cabin. My mind screamed it was impossible. Yet I could feel the earth's pulse, almost alive, responding to the presence of the intruder in its domain. Me. I caught a glimpse of the figures. Tall, elongated, humanoid shadows that moved fluidly, almost as extensions of the trees themselves. They circled the cabin with deliberate precision, their eyes glowing faintly, watching, calculating. The whispers intensified, forming words I could almost understand. Join us. Become one with the hollow. I barricaded myself inside, Heart pounding, I realized this was not just a forest, it was a predator, and I had entered its lair. The seventh night brought the first physical encounter. I was asleep when a soft scratching sound on the cabin walls jolted me awake. The fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, and through the glass, I saw elongated shadows bending unnaturally. Then came a knock, not at the door, but the walls themselves. The vibration traveled through the floor as if something, or someone, was pushing against the cabin's very foundation. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I traced the source. A figure partially visible through the fog, leaning impossibly against the cabin wall. A cold pressure pressed against my mind, whispering my fears, my memories, even my regrets. The hollow was aware of me. It wasn't just outside, it was inside, moving through the walls, testing, learning, preparing. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. My body froze, paralyzed by the intelligence, patience, and menace radiating from the shadows. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the figure retreated into the fog, leaving only the eerie silence of the forest and a single, lingering whisper. Soon, by the eighth night, I could no longer ignore the pull of the forest. An invisible force guided me down the hidden path behind the cabin into the hollow, where twisted roots formed natural archways and shadows pooled unnaturally. The air was heavy, vibrating with whispers and soft breathing, not my own. I stumbled into a small clearing. At its center stood a massive, hollowed-out tree, blackened and gnarled. Around it, dozens of humanoid shadow figures emerged from the fog, surrounding me silently. Their movements were synchronized, fluid, as if the forest itself had orchestrated them. A deep, resonant sound echoed from the hollow tree, vibrating through my bones. The shadows raised their elongated hands in unison, and I understood with chilling clarity. This was the heart of the hollow, the place where all who entered eventually became part of the forest's consciousness. I tried to run, but my legs moved slowly, as if submerged in water. The whispers became a roar inside my head. Stay. Join us. Forever. The hollow wasn't just observing, I was being assimilated. By the ninth night, resistance was futile. The forest pulsed beneath me, a heartbeat I could not escape. The shadow figures advanced slowly, silently, enclosing me in a ring of darkness. My body felt heavy, my mind numb. Then, the hollow reached inside me. Not physically, but mentally. Thoughts, memories, fears, and regrets were extracted. Observed and absorbed, I realized the forest did not kill. It consumed differently, leaving no body but a consciousness entwined with its roots, trees, and shadows. I screamed mentally as my identity blurred. My vision merged with the shadows, my awareness expanded into the hollow itself. I was no longer human in the traditional sense. I was a witness, a sentinel, a whisper among the trees. I understood the forest's patience, intelligence, and hunger. The shadows finally receded, leaving me alone. Or so it seemed. My body was still there, but I was fundamentally changed. I could hear every heartbeat of the forest, every shift of the fog, every whisper of the hollow. Years later, I exist as part of the hollow. Occasionally, new visitors arrive, hikers, wanderers, or curious souls seeking solitude. I observe, whisper, and guide them through the forest's subtle manipulations, testing their fear and patience. The cabin still stands, weathered and isolated, a beacon for the unwary. If anyone listens carefully, they might hear faint whispers through the wind. My voice among the countless others who have become part of the hollow. Some nights, I sense the new arrivals looking back at me, unaware that I am already part of the forest. If you ever see a cabin deep in a hollowed forest, surrounded by twisted pines and fog, remember this. You're not alone. The hollow watches. It waits. And it never forgets. My name is Daniel Hughes, and I began my job as a park ranger in the vast forests of northern Maine in the spring of 2019. It was my dream job. Remote wilderness, wildlife, and the quiet that comes from being miles from the nearest town. But nothing could have prepared me for what I would experience that summer. From the first night, I sensed something unusual. While performing my evening patrol, I noticed faint footprints along the old logging trail, perfectly human-shaped but impossibly large. There were no vehicles, no animals, nothing that could explain them. The forest was still, unnaturally so. Like it was holding its breath, I dismissed it initially. Forests have strange paths and nocturnal wildlife, I told myself. But as night deepened, I began hearing faint footsteps behind me. Each time I turned, nothing was there. It wasn't the wind. This was deliberate, following me, keeping pace without sound. Then I first saw him. A figure standing motionless between the trees, pale, elongated, and impossibly still. He stared directly at me. His presence was oppressive, unnatural, and I felt my chest tighten. It was as if the forest itself had eyes, and they were on me. That night, sleep was impossible. I could hear whispering just at the edge of perception, calling my name. Daniel. Daniel. During my first full patrol, the forest revealed more of its secrets. Every path I took seemed to curve back on itself. The landmarks subtly shifted, and every time I glanced behind me, the night watcher appeared at the edge of my vision. Always still, always observing. I tried talking to senior rangers. They laughed it off, claiming it was stress or nerves. But the deeper I went into the forest, the less rational explanations made sense. Birdsong and rustling leaves were muted here. Silence dominated. I felt like I had stepped into a vacuum of sound and life, where only one presence existed. Him. That night, my tent was set in a small clearing. I woke to the feeling of being watched. Outside, a shadow moved between the trees. I froze, flashlight in hand, and saw him staring. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe, just watched. My heart raced as the wind carried soft whispers, like hundreds of tiny voices chanting my name, overlapping into an unintelligible hum. I realized the night watcher wasn't alone. The forest itself amplified him, bending shadows and fog into extensions of his form. By the third week, I began researching local records. Over the past decade, several hikers and campers had disappeared in the same sector of the park. Witnesses claimed they saw a tall figure watching from the trees, always at night, sometimes accompanied by strange sounds. Whispers, breathing, or faint scratching on trees. I remembered the ranger station warnings. Don't patrol alone in the deep north woods after dark. I thought I understood the risks, wildlife, accidents, but nothing mentioned him. The night watcher was something else entirely. One evening, I followed a faint trail in the fog. Footprints, massive and distorted, led to a clearing. There was a circle of stones, charred wood, and twisted tree branches forming humanoid shapes. Something had been here recently. I felt it watching me, waiting. The whispers intensified. They weren't calling just my name. They were telling me things, revealing secrets I had never shared with anyone. My rational mind recoiled, but a part of me couldn't help listening. I realized he wasn't just observing. He was aware of me on a deeply personal level. like the forest itself had become sentient through him. It happened one night during a heavy fog. I patrolled alone, flashlight cutting through the mist, when I saw him clearly for the first time. Pale, elongated limbs, unnaturally thin, standing perfectly still. The forest seemed to bend around him, shadows curving unnaturally toward his form. I froze. His eyes, if they were eyes, glimmered faintly, unblinking. The fog shifted, making his figure appear even taller. Stretching impossibly, I wanted to run, but my legs refused. Something primal rooted me to the spot. Then came the whispers, now loud and coherent. "You are alone. You cannot leave. We see you." The words weren't just in my ears. They resonated inside my mind. My chest tightened, as if the air itself was compressing me. I stumbled backward and tripped over roots. When I looked up, he was gone. Yet I could feel him, watching, waiting. The forest was no longer a backdrop. It was a predator, and he was its vanguard. That night, sleep was impossible. Every shadow in my tent seemed to stretch and twist, forming glimpses of his elongated frame. I realized he could manipulate not just perception, but reality itself. Senior rangers warned me to use a nearby cabin as a base during night patrols. It was decrepit, abandoned, and situated in a dense part of the forest I laughed at first. But by my fourth night, I welcomed the shelter. Inside, I found signs of previous occupants, old camping gear, journals, and cryptic warnings. "Do not look out the window after dark. He is watching." My stomach dropped. I spent the night scanning the surrounding forest. Mist thickened into curtains between the trees. Suddenly, shapes moved. Multiple figures. Not just him, shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally, forming humanoid silhouettes. The Night Watcher had allies. Or perhaps he was a manifestation of the forest itself, and the others were extensions of his form. As I watched, one shadow approached the cabin deliberately. My hands shook. It paused just beyond the window, staring. Then it vanished. But the feeling of eyes remained. Burning into my skull, I realized the forest was alive, in a way I could not comprehend, using him as its agent, its hunter, its sentinel. By the sixth night, I had lost track of time. The forest had swallowed all sense of normalcy. Fog rolled in thicker than ever, swirling around tree trunks like living smoke. Every step I took along the patrol trail was mirrored by shadows, moving independently yet synchronized with my own pace. The Night Watcher appeared again, tall and impossibly thin, emerging silently from the fog, his elongated limbs bent in ways that defied nature, and his eyes glimmered faintly with a cold intelligence. I could feel the forest bending to him, the roots reaching, the mist curling, the shadows stretching unnaturally toward his form. I tried to run. The path I had memorized for weeks twisted unnaturally, looping back toward the same clearing. It was as if the forest itself was alive, a sentient predator guiding me back to him. Then the whispers began. Hundreds of voices, layered and overlapping, calling my name, recounting every fear, every failure. I realized with horror that he was reading me, pulling my thoughts into the forest. My mind screamed in resistance, but my body was frozen by some invisible force. By midnight, I understood. I wasn't being followed. I was being hunted, and the forest would not allow me to leave. That night, I heard scratching on the cabin walls, soft, deliberate, almost patient. I shone my flashlight through the fog outside. The Night Watcher's elongated hand appeared pressed against the wooden wall, fingers impossibly long. The shadows surrounding him rippled, as if the forest itself had moved to create his form. A cold pressure gripped my chest. The whispers had become coherent now. "You cannot escape. You are ours. My legs froze. My mind screamed to act, but I couldn't move. The forest, the fog, the watcher. They were all connected, extensions of a single, terrible consciousness. Suddenly, the cabin door rattled violently. Something outside was testing the barriers of wood and metal. My flashlight flickered as though struggling against some unseen force, I realized with bone-chilling clarity. He was not just watching. He could manipulate reality, bend it to his will, and the forest was his instrument. I collapsed against the floor, paralyzed with terror, as the shadows receded, leaving only the silence, and the lingering sense of his gaze burning into my soul. By the 8th night, I could no longer resist the pull. The fog guided me down a forgotten trail into a hidden clearing, where dozens of shadow figures merged with the mist. Their movements were synchronized, fluid, like the forest itself had become sentient. At the center stood the Night Watcher, taller and more distorted than ever, surrounded by twisting, spectral forms. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, almost alive. I understood with a cold certainty. This was the heart of the forest's consciousness, and I had been lured here deliberately. The whispers escalated into a roar inside my mind. Join us. Become one with the forest. My vision blurred as the figures extended toward me. Roots and fog wrapped around my legs, binding me. I realized the Watcher wasn't merely an entity. He was a conduit, and the forest was feeding through him, assimilating everything in its path. I screamed, but no sound emerged. My body was immobilized. My mind struggled to remain separate. The forest pulsed, breathing, alive in a way I could not comprehend. By the 9th night, resistance became futile. My senses merged with the forest. I could hear the whispers of every tree, every leaf, every shadow. Of the Night Watcher's gaze penetrated my mind. Thoughts, fears, memories, they were no longer my own. The shadow figures advanced, closing in with perfect precision. The forest pulsed through my veins, vibrating with a consciousness older than time. I realized the Night Watcher had been a ranger once, like me, now transformed into an extension of the forest's will. My body fell to the ground, but my mind remained aware. I became part of the Watcher's network, an observer and a sentinel, tethered to the forest in a terrifying communion. Resistance was pointless. The forest had claimed me. I understood the truth. The Night Watcher was not unique. The forest consumed rangers over decades, assimilating them into its consciousness, using them to lure and test new prey. I was next in line, a permanent witness to its insidious patience. Now I am part of it. I patrol the forest, guiding new visitors along twisted trails, whispering warnings, or leading them toward the clearing if curiosity drives them too deep. The Night Watcher still exists as the central node, towering, pale, and impossibly thin. I hear his thoughts, his consciousness intertwined with the forest. Occasionally, I glimpse humans, hikers, campers, and curious souls, wandering where they shouldn't. I watch them from the shadows, feeling their fear. Some notice the fog, the unnatural silence, or glimpses of elongated forms. Most ignore the warnings and become part of the forest's memory. If you ever patrol a dense forest at night and feel unseen eyes, hear whispers, or glimpse elongated shadows, remember this: the Night Watcher is real. He waits, patient, ever vigilant. The forest is alive, and once it notices you, escape is impossible. The forests we've explored tonight are not just land and trees. They are living, breathing shadows, hiding secrets that defy explanation. From the hollowed cabin to the Night Watcher's haunting vigilance, each story has shown us that solitude in the wild can be deadly. and that the wilderness watches, waits, and sometimes it hunts. As rangers and wanderers alike have discovered, what seems like an ordinary path or a quiet clearing can conceal forces far beyond our understanding. These aren't legends or campfire tales. They are true accounts of encounters with the unknown, experiences that leave permanent marks on those who survive, or those who don't. If you ever venture into dense forests, remember the whispers in the wind, the shadows that seem to move, and the eyes that watch from the darkness. The stories of these 7 park rangers are warnings. They remind us that nature can be unforgiving, and sometimes the fear isn't in the wild, it's in what's watching you. Thank you for watching, Dark Fears family. If these stories chilled you, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. The forests are patient, but we'll continue to share the true horrors that linger in the shadows.